Yeah, but I'm still trying to get when David finishes his series, I'm trying to get him on here to talk a little about the website, which is an amazing resource.
Great. Yeah, for both networks.
Yeah, yeah. Um, wow, it's on the hour. I think we can actually get started. And usually, as I'm saying that, Dan turns on recording, but he did 2 minutes earlier. um, oh, we have another 3 in the morning person. Hello, Alan, joining from Australia. Um, so happy Saturday morning, afternoon, evening, Sunday morning for some of you. Here we go again. There's Alan. Yes, um, I'm. It's 11 a.m. here, and I'm still trying to wake up. That's my problems, I guess. The uh, the luxury of being mostly retired. Anyway, we have a speaker this morning with somebody who's spoken to us before, so I shouldn't have to introduce, but I will because sometimes I forget to, and we have a few new people who have seen this gentleman in some of his earlier presentations when he looked like a mountain man, and now he's back to being himself. Gentleman is one of those backwards guys. He started by calling challenge, and then eventually worked his way down to teaching beginner classes and doing party nights, um, but still understands challenge also. And he's also, boy, I better be careful how I word this. Worked his way down doing contra dancing. No, he's jumped over to the parallel world of contra dancing, and has learned to appreciate it also, and has been in some ways involved with it. Um, he's also, like many of us, a member of Caller Lab. Like just a few of us, worked his way up to the Board of Governors. Like even fewer of us, was on the executive committee. And probably the thing that he's most known for on Color Lab, I don't know, has had the most influence, is on the definitions committee, and trying to find compromises with everybody's opinion for years and years and years, although he's passed that on to others at this point. But for me personally, the biggest thing about him is he's a good personal friend. Anyway, without further ado, let's have a hand for Clark Baker. Thank you. Oh, I also forgot to mention, he and I were talking the other day about what kind of things I should be presenting here. I've got a lot of people like David Millstone saying, yeah, I will very soon, but I'm not quite ready. But Clark said, well, let me see what I have. And he went looking through the stuff he'd posted and found a very interesting question that somebody had asked him. What 10 moves are the most important in square dancing? And he came up with an answer, which I'm sure you're all dying to hear. And this was in, what year was it?
2003.
2003. So his answers may have changed. I'm sure you all have differences of opinions, so discussion should be good. And whether he presents and then lets you comment, or I don't know, let's let Clark do his own thing. Lawrence, happy afternoon to you too for joining in. Clark, take it away.
Sure. I'm going to share my desktop. And I guess I have to click this button. And then we will go here. Looks good?
Yes.
Good.
Looks good.
Yeah.
And I tried to remember to get the font big enough so people can read. Okay. So why do we care? It seemed interesting. It's an interesting question. It's not like there's any right or wrong answer. It's opinion. It might give you a new perspective on some of the tools in your toolbox. I'm probably going to mention a few calls or ideas that you've never heard of, and it'll give you uh, a different way of thinking. It'll stretch your mind a little bit. And that's kind of all this is going to be. So in 2003, almost in March, we aren't quite up to March yet, a guy on one of the Square Dance Callers mailings lists named Lyle Shields Jr., who I don't think I've ever met, but I got the impression he was an older caller or dancer, and kind of maybe thought certain things on the discussion list were too much, computery and challengey and all that. He was more of a let's keep it simple and everyone just have fun kind of guy. He asked, what 10 moves are the most important to square dancing? And as I remember, or at least have in my records, no one but me answered him. But I came up with a pretty long, definitive list pretty quickly because it seemed like an easy question to me back then. And I answered it in 2003, and we'll do that last. But I tried to forget what I said and didn't reread my webpage, and instead answered it last night and chatted with my wife. And first off, there's really no right answer. This is just all opinion. And the second thing is when he said move, I assume he means call. What 10 calls are the most important to square dancing? And obviously most important is subjective. What criteria are we using? And I never wrote down my criteria. So I thought of a few. Is it important to callers or to dancers? Is it important for resolving the square? I mean, if you're a chicken plucker kind of person, pass through, trade by, dive through, pass to the center are all real important calls for resolving. If you're a sight caller, a call like slide through is real important for resolving. Maybe important for moving people around. Pass through, bend the line, circulate, I don't know. Maybe it's important for creativity. Swing through once and a half, swing through once and a quarter, swing through 3/4. Maybe it's important because that particular call changed how callers had to think about resolving and the square. My understanding is when the spin chain through was invented, because it had just those two people switch places from one half of the square to the other, it really broke the way a lot of callers could resolve the square, and they were reluctant to use it, or they had to use it twice, the old when in trouble, do it double. But even that didn't necessarily solve their problem. So maybe that's an important call. If we had done a really good talk, we would stop here and say, everyone get a piece of paper and a pencil and write down your 10 top calls. And hopefully you at least have a mental list or some ideas that I'm not going to pollute your thinking with. But maybe when you saw the topic, you thought about that. Maybe it's important, the calls are important because this is what the non-dancing public knows about square dancing. This is what we can hang our marketing on. And for that, I think the only two calls they really know are do-sa-do and swing your partner. And the funny thing about do-sa-do is whenever I go someplace, especially if I'm teaching school age kids, maybe in 7th grade, and do do-sa-do, they all do an elbow swing because they think elbow swing is do-sa-do.
Same here.
Yeah, yay, Tony, exactly. And right, do we think there's anything else the public knows about square dancing other than yeehaw?
I know Alaman left and right and left grand because almost everybody's watched Bugs Bunny.
Oh, there you go, the Bugs Bunny cartoon, yeah. I think calls could be important because of call frequency. And I actually did a Google search just hoping to show you the call frequency of mainstream calls. And I did not find anything. I found Vic Cedar's call frequency of A2 calls. But just taking a guess, I think these are some of the frequent calls. Alaman left, promenade home, right and left grand. We use those mostly every sequence. square throughs, swing throughs, runs, scoot back, and recycle. While I'm on this topic, I think I saved this up here. If we go to the Square Dance History Project, David Millstone, what we were talking about earlier, this is something I did a long time ago. All of these are calls. You recognize scoot back and recycle. And the size of the call is proportional to the call frequency of it. It's some call frequency. And what's important about all these calls, let me just scroll around, is all these calls were written by Lee Kottman. So this is a list of all the calls and how frequent, how popular they are. So I thought that was an interesting thing to make one time. And that's why I added recycle and scoot back to my list. Let's go back here. So call frequency. Maybe these calls are important because it's what we can teach and get beginners through, especially to one-time party dance. Circles, stars, do-si-do, arm turns, including maybe Alaman left if we give it a name, right and left grand, promenade, and depending on if you dare in the group, swing your partner. I'm going to focus, I implicitly back in 2003 and today, without really answering the question of why are these calls important, I'm going to probably focus more on they form some kind of foundation or they inspired so much more in square dancing. And here's my 2022 list. I put, and these aren't in any order, just the order I thought of them. Run. I think run is a really powerful call. It's a two-person call. It's quick. It changes the formation quickly. You can do it from lots of places. And it also has a longer, another variation, the cross run. So I think run's a pretty important call. Circulate. Circulate has a simple rule that's hard for dancers to internalize, meaning it's kind of one of those mathematical calls, easy to define and really hard to dance. Lots and lots of applications, places where it can be done from. Columns, lines, T-bone, there's a split variation. And also Circulate has enabled other calls that use Circulate in their definition. For example, coordinate starts with a circulate or circulate once and a half. AC-doocy has the end circulate while the centers do a different call, trade. So I think Circulate is both a foundational call and a very important call. And I don't think I want to stop right here, but I do want to show you some other circulates that you may not have thought of. Spin chain the gears, or frankly, any of the big pattern calls, relay the doocy, etc. I think that these are important. Spin chain the gears. These are important. These are important calls. Counter rotate, which I do think we need to talk about, is a simple call with a simple rule similar to Circulate. Many of you may not know counter rotate, so I want to teach it to you. I'm not saying you have to start using it with your dancers. It also has a split variation, etc. I'm not going to show it to you right now because both Circulate and counter rotate were on my 2003 list. So I'll show you some pictures of them there. Dixie Grand. There's a whole family of Dixie calls. I don't know if Dixie Grand was the first or the second, but you know Dixie style to a wave. But there's also a Dixie sachet, there's a Dixie diamond, there's a Dixie spin, etc. So when I was thinking yesterday, I added Dixie Grand on that. Tag the line, and this one's also on my old list. Tag the line, I think, is important because it has a variety of starting formations. We normally think of it from lines back to back, but obviously right-hand two-face lines, be them parallel or end-to-end. We know that tag the line is hard for dancers because it requires situational awareness. They have to find the center of their line of 4 and turn in that direction. And some dancers find that difficult. It becomes instinctive after a while, but maybe the muscle memory doesn't work from everywhere. It also introduces the idea of tagging positions. There's tag the line nothing, tag the line a quarter, a half, 3/4, and all the way. And then there's also the whole idea and another call that it introduces, extending the tag, going from one tagging position to another. And then there's a bunch of tagging call suffixes, things you can add after that start with a tag the line and end with another call. So if you happen to be familiar with follow your neighbor, there's a call tag your neighbor, which we could define as a half tag and follow your neighbor. But in the old days, we thought of it as a tag the line blending into the follow your neighbor action. And there's probably at least tens of those. Square through, I thought, was worth adding. It has limited starting position, facing couples pretty much, modulo if you started it from an ocean wave, which is pretty difficult. But it takes a parameter, and ideas of calls that take a parameter, that take a number, square through 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. It also has a default, meaning if you don't say, you're supposed to go 4 hands, and it has that left variation. So it has a bunch of variety. And then finally, other calls are based on it, like square chain through and square chain the top, which are probably up in advanced or C1. And I can show you those if you're interested. As a nod to Don, square around is, I believe, your call, right, Don? And I really like that. I show it whenever I have to show a disposable experimental, and it kind of is based on a lot of square through type ideas, successive hands, a right hand, a left hand, a right hand, where do you turn next, and so forth. Also, we have another variation, square through on the nth hand, square through on the third hand, swing through, etc. So I think square through has a lot of variety. It's also like a mini right and left grand, and might be an important call. Grand square and or teacup chain, hard to pick between those two. We use them in singing calls for those of us who do singing calls. Grand square has a well-defined timing. It may be one of the few times when modern Western square dancers and callers try to call with the phrasing of the music. It spawned a whole bunch of other squared set pattern moves. There's variations on grand square, grand slide, etc. There's also a ton of teacup chain variations, and calls like everybody chain and teacup like a daisy, etc. So these kind of stand alone, but I think they're an interesting, important part of square dancing. I added a formation here. I don't know if that counts as a call or not, but when dancers are introduced to the diamond formation, suddenly, and I'm assuming we're all kind of at least familiar with that. If we were in waves, let's say we're in right hand two-face lines, heads lead right, veer left, and have the centers hinge, that would be the girl's hinge, then we have a diamond. And there's a diamond on each half of the square. And what's interesting about diamonds is suddenly once you have that formation, you need a bunch of ways to get into it other than just calling centers hinge, like I did. And we have calls like switch to a diamond and follow to a diamond. Then once you're in the formation, you got to have stuff you can do from there, usually the circulate, diamond circulate. And then you have to have ways to get out of it. And we currently have flip and cut the diamond. You could have the centers hinge again. And then once you start having diamonds, people invented other formations like hourglasses and galaxies. And when we get terminations up, we can show you a few of those if people haven't seen them and are interested. So I thought that was a pretty important call or concept or formation to talk about. And that's all I came up with last night. But to prepare for the talk, I did some Other research, I phoned a friend. My friend was Ted Lizotte, Tech Square's current caller. And here's Ted's 2022 list. And first we talked a bit about the, what do we mean by an important call? And he said diamonds right off the bat. So that was great because I had diamonds on my list for all the reasons we've talked about. He also points out that diamonds are the first time that dancers, he says, sometimes people ask me, what's the difference between mainstream or plus and advanced and challenge? And one way that he describes it is in mainstream dancing, you're always hanging on to someone. There's always someone to work with. And when you get to diamonds at plus, diamonds are plus, aren't they?
Yes.
Good. When you get to diamonds at plus, everyone isn't hanging on to someone. The points of the diamonds are out there dancing individually. And that's hard for people. And when you get to advanced and you get to an hourglass, you not only have 4 dancers not hanging on to somebody, you have 6 dancers not hanging on to somebody. And when you get to C1, and especially C1 blocks, all 8 dancers are dancing by themselves for that particular call or formation, and their positioning is important, and they don't have any hints by hanging on to other dancers. So that was, I thought, an interesting way to describe those different dance programs. Okay, then he said ocean wave rule facing couples rule. He uses those a lot to add creativity and variety. Interesting, it's not a call, but he says, I don't know if it's allowed to be on the list, but that's what I would say. Then fractions. Again, another way to add creativity and variety, swing through 1.5, scoot back 1.5, etc. Promenade home 1.5. No, promenade home 1.25. I guess that would be a stir the bucket sequence. Circulate. We already mentioned circulate. Trade. He teaches trade on lesson 1, assuming that they're, learning full square dancing and it's not just a one-time party. Trade is incredibly flexible and a useful manipulative tool. Arm turns, trade, start with that one. Partner trade from a normal couple versus partner trade from a sashayed couple. It really takes a bit of effort to get dancers through trades. Then you can do trades over a distance. When you're in lines facing out, normal lines, you can have the boys trade, the girls trade. Then you also have the couples trade. And then eventually that leads into trade the wave. So he has trade on his list. Doing things left, again, maybe it's more of a concept than it is a call, but he thinks that's important. Roll, the idea that you have body flow and you have to remember body flow and know what it is, and it's a suffix. It's something we add after virtually any call. Circulate and roll, scoot back and roll, swing through and roll, etc. And then we talked a bit about courtesy turns, because courtesy turns enable ladies chains and right and left throughs and stuff. It just seems like a pretty basic thing, and chains are important, and stars and so forth. So he added courtesy turns. And then stars, both stars which you use for 2 ladies chain, and you can describe the ladies action in the middle as a 2-handed star. 4 ladies chain, the idea when you first show people ladies chain and head ladies chain and side ladies chain, and then say everyone can go at the same time. And that leads into our all 4 couples and all 8 concepts in advanced, which also need to use those stars for traffic patterns. And that was all he came up with. But I thought that was an interesting list and very different than the way I'd been thinking. So let's move on to my 2003 list. So I wrote Circulate on the list as the first one. Can we bring up terminations for a minute? This is going to be.
Yeah, you're going to have to enable my sharing or concurrent sharing, Dan. and I can turn mine on and off.
Oh, that's cool.
I don't know how to do concurrent sharing.
Okay, I will stop my share and
Okay.
we'll let Mel do it. I tried to run, for the people on the call, I tried to run Taminations on my Mac, and both with 2 different browsers, I was unsuccessful this morning. Okay, actually, since I'm going to mention, we're going to do something different here. You can just reset. And I just want ocean waves. So like heads pair off and step to a wave. Gets us to ocean waves quick. And everyone knows circulate here. So do a circulate just so we see it. We can turn off the axes, new feature. Great. Okay, have the do a hinge. And I didn't know how to make the girls roll, so just say girls quarter in. Oops. Hinge and girls roll. Oh, we're so good. I'm going to learn. You're going to teach me. Look at that. So we call this a T-bone setup, but the call circulate works from here because circulate, everyone does their part irrespective of anyone else's facing direction. So the girls are thinking they're in a right-hand column and the boys are thinking they're in right-hand waves. So do a circulate. Boom. This one's a little more interesting for the dancers. The girls still have their column thing, no big deal, but the boys are doing the looking out part of circulate and will walk in certain arcs. Do another circulate. So for people who hadn't seen that, I think that's kind of pretty cool. We want to get out of this, have the girls quarter right. And I want to show you counter rotate for a second. Step or do a touch, also known as step to a wave. Okay, so the easiest place for counter rotate, it happens to be on the C1 list. I think the split counter rotate is on one of the advanced lists. So counter rotate, I think, is like dancing on a lazy Susan or a turntable. And actually, just for grins, Mel, do a switch the wave. Oh, just don't do that. Stop. Do a heads you turn back. That's even easier. So if we were on a lazy Susan and we're going to rotate the set in the direction everyone's facing, do counter rotate. Does everyone get a sense of what how that call works? Do one more counter rotate. But just like circulate, have the heads you turn back again, or do 2 undos up or 3 undos, up to you. Now, if we do a counter rotate, everyone has to do their own part because it's just like circulate in that sense. Go ahead. Ooh. And do one more counter rotate to make sure people have the idea. But this idea works from everywhere. So we want to get to 2 face lines. So I would do whatever the quick way to get to 2 face lines is. I'll let Mel be the caller and do it. I don't care what hand in this and where the genders are, just get me to 2 face lines. Oh, that's cool. And then you're going to veer left, right? Nope, yes. Cool. So from here, do a counter rotate, and you see we're all on the turntable. And this call actually dances pretty well. The 2 face lines are pretty far apart, but we normally wouldn't do it from 2 face lines. We want to get to ocean waves. So Mel, do a call to get us to ocean waves. And now from here, the boys have to do their part, the girls do their part, similar to circulate, do the counter rotate. So there's kind of some like the girls can hang on in the middle. There's some counter dancing action, and this has a pretty good feel to it. Has this sense of motion, and still the girls are connected. Do one more counter rotate just so people see that. And for grins, do a swing through. We don't really want to talk about its power, but we're ready for a right and left grand. Is that true?
Yes.
Yes. So we aren't going to do that, but we could. So notice that everyone has their partner, and you know, if we were talking our sequence thing, everyone's in sequence. Do a circulate. Everyone has their opposite. We're still in sequence. Do another circulate. And you notice that here we have the side girl is on the end looking out, right? And if we did that circulate, she became, do a circulate just so we see it. Suddenly, now the side girl's looking in, and then do a circulate. Now the side girl's looking out. Okay, now do the counter rotate. It's very similar to a circulate in that everyone ends up with their opposite person, but the side girl is still looking out. And then obviously, if we do another counter rotate, we'll be ready for the right and left grand again. So they're really close cousins, this circulate and this counter rotate. Now I want to show you a hard version of counter rotate. I want columns. You could, I'll get to it quickly. Just do also. This is a Lee Kottman call. He invented it when he was going to call in Japan. So here we are in columns. Do a counter rotate. We're all on the turntable. Ooh. Have the centers U-turn back. We'll get that going in opposite direction feel. Do a counter rotate from here. I like mechanical things. You kind of see, I like gears and stuff like that. You can kind of see that. Do another counter rotate. And just like circulate, let's make a T-bone setup. Have the girls quarter in. So this is a really ugly setup. When you're swapping calls, one caller to another, you leave them in this and then say, okay, you get it out. So do a circulate just to prove we can do that. We kind of saw this one earlier almost. Oh, don't do a circulate. We can't do it. But because dancer man 3 and 4 will crash. Who cares? I'm not going to do that. Do a counter rotate just to prove you can counter rotate anything. There's actually a place where dancers are not allowed to counter rotate, and there's traffic flow problems and all that. And yeah, you're going to see that again. Pretty yucky, right? But still that circular action. Anyhow, you can see why I like counter rotate. There's a lot more I could say on it, but I'm not. And I think that's good for now. You're going to give me back control and I will do my share screen.
And I have
Thank you.
now, thanks to Mark, I have now enabled multiple sharing. So next time,
Maybe
try it.
Okay. We talked about counter rotate. We talked about circulate. The next call I wrote was scoot back. This is back in 2003. Scoot back, when it was first introduced, involved using the same hand 3 times in a row. That was an anathema to callers. They said you can't do that, and yet we did it, and yet it stood the test of time. It's fun to dance, and it has a certain amount of variety to it. And we've learned a lot more about what using the same hand twice really means, and body flow and proper use of hands. Here's my run. We talked about that already. I think it has a lot of, it introduces the idea of runner and runnee. It does quick changes of formations. It has cross run. You can actually do it fractionally. It works with T-bones. It's a simple call with a simple rule and many, many, many possibilities. We talked about Tag the Line. That was on my current list. I put Remake on here. You can think of Remake as being a bit like Swing Through, but it asks the dancers to arm turn a quarter by the right, and then those who can go half by the left, and then those who can go 3/4 by the right. And so it's a 3-part call. It has this nice climb the fractions, quarter, half, 3/4. It alternates the hands you're using. It's another quirky call that always starts with the right hand. Things vary wildly while you're doing it. You can do it from bars and Alamo rings and waves and columns, and there's a grand version of it. So if you don't know Remake, Swing Through could be there, but I think Remake is just a little better to be in that slot. Spin chain the gears, as I said, any of the big pattern calls, relay the deucey, spin chain exchange the gears, relay the top, spin chain the star, any of those would have worked fine. Then I put chain reaction on. Chain reaction is a cleverly named call, another Lee Kottman call, by the way, in which dancers have to follow the rules, meaning the definition, piece by piece by piece. And you have to kind of reevaluate. And the flow dancers kind of never get good at the complex versions of chain reaction. Swing Through is the mainstream example because we can do it from facing couples, we can do it from right hand waves, left hand waves, there's a grand version, but chain reaction carries this whole idea of you have to follow the rules piece by piece and reevaluate where you are, situational awareness. And then we have phantoms. Phantoms you may have heard of. It's dancing without the real dancers there. I think Zoom dancing introduced the whole world, the whole square dance world, to dancing with phantoms. And some dancers really never master this, maybe because of their learning style, or maybe they just find it not fun. But if square dancing includes mainstream through C4, the idea of working with phantoms and having to do the stuff yourself without people pulling you through it, I think deserves a place on the list. And my final one is called Rewind. And believe it or not, I'm going to teach you how to do Rewind. And Rewind is an example of a concept, an idea that was considered and rejected by the majority of C4 dancers as being too hard. And this is not what we want in our dancing. So I'm including it because if we want to show the limits of square dancing or what is not square dancing, it seems like Rewind is the other bookend of that. So let's talk about Rewind for a minute. Is anyone scared or worried that this is going to be too cerebral for them? Trust me. We have 4 ways to dance. And you guys know one of them. The way we dance all the time. We're going to call this normal dancing. So normal dancing is where we walk from the beginning of the call to the end of the call. We walk forward. Sound good? Everyone's happy with normal dancing. Dancing backwards. I've seen people do this as a gimmick or a hack. You basically have to turn around and walk backwards from the beginning of the call to the end of the call. Each dancer is walking backwards through the call, but we're still doing the calls. So if you had, from a squared set, everybody you turn back and said, heads dance backwards through a right and left through, they would slowly back up. They, walking backwards, would probably end up passing left shoulders. And then they would still have the boy courtesy turn the girl with, for a change, the boy walking forward on the courtesy turn as the girl backs up on the courtesy turn, and the heads would end in couples back to back. We would show this in Taminations, except we can't, because Taminations probably doesn't have backward dancing. But I think everyone, at least the 5 of you I see, are going to nod that they understand backwards dancing. That would be Mel is nodding, Don's going to nod. Yep. Dan's nodding. Okay.
Also revolved around somebody dancing backwards.
I missed that comment. That's okay. So can anyone think of 2 more ways to dance?
Sideways seems obvious.
Oh, yeah, you're right. Sideways is a good one. And I actually can tell you about that and have that as a gimmick. And we call that nose dancing. And I can talk about that. Take a note and remind me to talk about nose dancing when we're not on the talk. Another way to dance is undo dancing. Let's say, and I actually use this as a teaching mechanism. Let's pass through, from, just imagine this in your head. We have lines facing, pass through, and we're about to teach the dancers bend the line. And we talk some words and we have them bend the line. Often I will say, undo that. And if it's a short little distance, they can undo bend the line. And I just want them to get the mechanical feel of what that bend the line, unbend the line, bend the line, see what you're actually doing there. So the act of undoing a call is walking backwards from the end of the call to the beginning. And for short calls, we can undo it. But if I said heads right and left through, and now undo that, that would be pretty hard. You would have to undo the courtesy turn, which with a little fumbling you could do. And then you'd have to undo the heads pass through, which is hard because you're walking backwards through it. And you can't really, you'd have to figure out which shoulder to pass and all that. On the other hand, if I had the head square through 4 and step to a wave, and we aren't going to undo that because undoing square through would also be hard and not fun. But if I had from the wave said swing through and then said undo that swing through, that would be pretty easy because you turned half by the right and half by the left. So the centers in the middle with the left would have to walk backwards through a trade, which isn't too hard because they're hanging on to each other, reconnect with the outsides, and then walk backwards through by the right. So we could see undoing swing through. Ready for what the fourth quadrant of this little matrix is? Rewind. Rewind is simply walking forward from the end of the call to the beginning of the call. So the good news about it isn't as awkward as undo dancing because you're walking forward through all the motions you need to do. And not all calls have good rewinds, but a bunch of them do. And they are dance patterns and dance feels that we don't normally have. And I can say more about this, but I don't want to right now because this isn't a talk about that. But trust me, it's really hard, even for experienced dancers who are used to complexity, to on the spot think about how to rewind a call they've never rewound before. So really teaching rewind as a concept ended up teaching rewind on a call by call basis. And no one wanted to learn, another 50 calls that they now can rewind. So that's why it didn't catch on at C4.
Can I interrupt quickly, Clark? Generally, your undo would be after do and then undo. Whereas
yes,
as I recall, you call rewind without having wound it first.
Yes, you make a good point. So in fact, what we would want to do if I want to teach people rewind is I'd say head start through, double pass through track 2. And I'd say, think about track 2, do a track 2. Then I would say, everyone you turn back, and now they're at the beginning position for rewinding track 2. And I can say rewind track 2, and it would be done from left-hand waves. Everyone would extend the tag twice, or left extend the tag twice. And then they would do that around the corner, whatever that first action of track 2, however you describe that. I describe it as tandem partner trade, but that's using other terms. But they would then rewind that action. Passing left shoulders. So the good news is we're at the end of the talk. I hope this all gave you something to think about and engenders some further discussion. So I will stop sharing. And here we are.
That was great, Clark. I see a lot of smiling faces and or blank stares. Mel's swollen head got worse. I've taken a lot of notes. I think I'll just comment on one, well, two of them. The rewind theory is one that Clark came up with, and I recall was a variety of things coming up and finally got a name. I wanted to comment on Ted's thinking diamonds are a
Yes.
significant difference, step ahead. And one thing you didn't mention about diamonds, but in all calls and except for circles and stuff, in basic mainstream, maybe plus, everybody in the square, especially in your foursome, is facing, think of just the foursome, is either facing along the north-south axis or along the east-west axis. And in diamonds, all of a sudden you've got some facing north-south and some facing east-west. Not only just some not holding hands, but there's the whole concept of people facing in 4 different directions rather than just 2. And that probably adds to the complexity of that.
And related to that, I thought the Clark's mention of spin chain through was interesting, because I think of spin chain through as the first place dancers get exposed to diamonds.
Yep.
Interesting, because that's, well, back in the 80s, you were introduced to diamonds at the mainstream level, and you would do a hinge and you had the centers doing, or sorry, the ends doing something around the outside to get that feeling, but knowing exactly what distance they were going, while the centers would do something independently. And that was more an introduction to concurrent activity from different formations, not essentially a diamond. The concept of diamond, you're introduced to what the position is, but it's more the introduction to concurrent dancing, the same as expanding heads, promenade, side, square through, running concurrently. So I find it interesting that depending on what level you call, because Clark, if I'm correct, you started at the top and worked down and now back up again. Is that correct?
So kind of, I think the first real dances I called might have been, challenge, C1E, C2, or I wrote sequences for C3 that we were dancing at the time, and then kind of filled in a little bit. But since I don't sing, I don't feel like I should be hired to call a mainstream or plus dance. So I only get paid to call advanced on up, and then wrapped around and started doing beginner dances and calling at schools.
With one of the questions that popped up is the way you look at what's important is from a top-down angle as opposed to a bottom-up, and it's that very, very significant transition between a challenge expanded dancer or caller as opposed to somebody coming from the bottom up would have a completely different perspective on this, which is great. I only had 2 comments, but I'll wait till the end because they're more generalized comments and questions. So,
John, what have you got to say? You just raised your hand, John.
John, your hand is up.
I did.
For it.
So when you talked about the rewind, people walking backwards through the call, they're going to end up in the original position, but facing the other way then, right?
Correct. So one thing that's true, remember on rewind, they're walking forward through the call, but
they're
from
going
the
to end
beginning
up
to the end. Yeah.
But they're going to end up facing the other way from where they started, right?
Right. So here's the thing, and we can quote, see this with track 2. If I ready to do a track 2, if I say track 2, you turn back, rewind track 2, you turn back, you should be right back where you started.
Okay. Yeah. All right.
And that should be true for every call that we can both do and rewind.
So okay. So if you turn back at the end of your rewind, you're going to be facing right where you started. So you complete the circle.
Right.
Okay.
And one other way people think of it is, if I'm ready to do a rewind track 2, is one way to help people think is to say, pretend that someone's standing right in front of you that's just done track 2, grab them by the shoulders and push them backwards through their track 2. So that's a way
Okay.
to think about it.
All right, thank you.
Or turn on Taminations and look at the path and
Yes.
walk back along the path. Alan, what's up?
My comment during the meeting, and somehow or other that didn't, I think I must have been muted,
You are.
was Clark that RSO is more fundamental than wheel and deal in the sense that it includes a backward dancing action.
Yes. And this actually might be a place to make a point that I've heard people say, and I see Larry mentioned it in the comment section. He mentioned that walk and dodge is a veer sideways, which has some sideways dancing. Is when I was coming up, some old time callers would tell me that all square dancing is 3 different actions. It's walking and turning in place, and maybe it's walking and dodging and turning in place, or arm turning or something. And it may be true that if we were trying to build Taminations and make a computer program that could show dancing, we really just need to have a couple of different actions for our dancers. But that explanation didn't help me. Like, it didn't help me teach dancing. It didn't help me learn dancing. It didn't help me convey dancing. So I don't know what to make out of the callers who in the old days told me all you're doing is walking and turning and dodging or something. But yeah, okay.
I want to throw in a comment that's slightly off, but it's about ASO. I learned an interesting thing shortly after Lee Kottman came up with that. I had an experimental group that I used to teach all sorts of whatever I felt like watching. And because I knew that we didn't need ASO because it was nothing but a single hinge and split counter rotate, I taught my group new hinge. I taught them split counter rotate early in the evening. And then very shortly after that, I only used it after a single hinge. I'd always use the pattern single hinge, split counter rotate. Then I let a tip or two go by, and then I taught ASO. And then eventually I mixed the two, split counter rotate once, single hinge, split counter rotate one time, and then ASO another. And they danced it differently. It really was a different feel, a different look, even though it followed the exact same path on the floor. It really blew my mind to see that happen.
Yeah, no, I think that's an important point, and it comes in defining calls and how you think about them. Larry, your hand's up.
Yeah, I was intrigued by Rewind, and I was wondering, I wanted to think about it in terms of other calls.
Yes.
And I was wondering if you could mention maybe 2 or 3 really easy, other easy rewind calls that I could just kind of play with after this meeting.
Yeah. I mean, I'll mention 2 right now that are worth working out, and we can talk about, like, maybe once we cross the hour. But Follow Your Neighbor and Chase Right both have good rewind flow and are not too hard to dance. And I know that there's people who perhaps only know mainstream, and we mentioned calls like, ASO, and you're like, what is that? And it ends up that ASO is a very close cousin to Wheel and Deal. And you guys all know Wheel and Deal. Let's pretend we have two-face lines and normal two-face lines, and we know how to do Wheel and Deal. What if we had the girls U-turn back and just had the boys drag the girls through a Wheel and Deal? That idea, there is a concept in challenge called drag, where some people do the call normally and the people they're connected to just go along for the ride in whatever their facing direction. And ASO is, ends drag the centers for a Wheel and Deal. So I think, now you know how to do ASO, and it happens to have good feel, and it doesn't feel like you're being dragged. It feels like good connected dancing. It's done from ocean waves or inverted lines. Does Larry have more, or is your hand left up?
Your digital hand's up, Larry.
Yeah, I know. I was checking to see if drag was on the C4 list. Yeah, let me get rid of my hand.
That's a new concept, one-handed dancing.
That's it, right?
There we get to see the so there, right?
So Clark, you were talking about tag the line being a difficult concept for some people to visualize where the
For
center
dancers.
for
Yeah.
dancers. I found that when I teach dancers, I don't say look at the center for the center of your line. I say look for the far end of your line.
I think that I heard that hint and I thought that was a great teaching hint. Yes.
They conceptualize it a lot better that way, a lot
Yep.
easier. So when you were here, I am hogging again. When you were talking about frequencies of calls, you were talking about patter calling.
Yes.
If you think about singing calls, I'd like to throw in that Ferris wheel would be very high on that list.
Yeah. No, I think you're right.
It's a crutch for
You
many.
deserve a penny for every Ferris wheel ever called.
Oh, I deserve it. Yeah. Somebody asked me once, "Do you get a stipend for every time it's called?" And I said, "No," and it's a good thing because think of how much I'd have to pay for all the other calls I use.
Yeah.
Anyone else? I don't see any hands up.
I see Mel.
Oh, Mel, yes.
I just had two comments. And one thing was, Clark, I think you are probably one of the bravest men in the world I've ever met. And the reason is when you talking about dancing and your wife dances, of course, you said you asked your wife what the top 10 calls, and then you qualified it with no right answer and gave a different answer than she did. You have got to be the bravest man in the world. And the other one, because you would know this better than I do, it intrigued me when you said climb the fractions. There's so many movements that do that. Has that ever been looked at as a call?
I don't
Quarter,
know,
half,
but
3/4. It's incorporated in so much dancing.
while we're mentioning it, can you throw up Taminations for a sec? Even better than remake, just reset the square and get us into waves. So we talked about remake, and let's just look at remake. It's going to be the quarter, half, 3/4. Go for it. I think it's either remake. Oh, okay. I bet you could just said remake.
Would it do it? It wasn't doing it. I probably had a different.
Oh,
format.
maybe you need remake the wave.
No, it works with remake.
Oh yeah.
There you go.
Okay.
Quarter, half, 3/4. And here's what makes this tricky for dancers. Trade the wave or something, mix, however you turn back, however you want to get to left-hand waves. If we call remake from here, go ahead and do remake. It starts with the right, so suddenly it's very different. But let me show you swing the fractions, which is quarter, half, 3/4, half, quarter, alternating, starting with the right and alternating the whole way along. Watch this one. Quarter, half, 3/4, half left, quarter right. And then look from here. Here we're in diamonds. You can actually do a remake or do another swing. Okay, either one. Do another swing the fractions or a remake, right? Quarter, half, 3/4. So like, you just don't know where your next action's coming from as a dancer. And as we know, quarter and 3/4 turns can be tricky for newer dancers. So I've always loved, and also we don't have many palindrome calls, and swing the fractions is a palindrome. Remake, you could do in reverse order. You could go 3/4, half, quarter. I don't know if Taminations has it, but in reverse order remake would be, yeah, you can do it by cast off 3/4 by the right. Oh, well, we're doing a left in reverse order left remake, but that's okay. Half and then a quarter. So I like these things with the fractions that keep changing. I don't know that there's anything that goes up the fractions, quarter, half, 3/4 full and keeps going. But when you mentioned it, swing the fractions was the closest I had to it.
Taminations, by the way, will do any compatible call in reverse order.
That's cool. Oh, because it knows the parts.
You type in reverse order and it will do it.
in reverse order.
Well,
string
remake
attachment,
in reverse order.
or remake.
Clark, so
It may not care.
from
Right.
Wade,
Yeah, do the syntax different, opposite. Type remake in
Remake in
order.
reverse order. I like
There
that.
we go.
And then Don's going to say something.
Huh.
No. Oh, well.
And
Oh.
Reeve has his hand up.
I found
Go ahead, Don.
reverse order without the word in.
Oh, okay, thank you.
And it works.
Same syntax?
Reverse order and
Remake.
remake.
There you go. So now we're going 3/4 and then a half and then a quarter. And, you know, if you were not doing advanced or even plus, and you needed some variety at a mainstream dance, and you're willing to either teach a call or something, you could simply, they know swing through and they know the idea of starting with the right hand. You could throw in and build up and theme a whole tip or whatever around remake, just as a throwaway call to say, hey, here's an interesting call to play with. Being sure that your ability to resolve the square and manipulate the dancers after where it leaves you in, you know, is within your capabilities.
so I want to break in because the hour's up, and then I'll go
Good.
for see Larry's and Chris's hands up, so we'll go with that. But first of all, the official part is up, and we got a lot more coming because I see hands up, and because my hand's up too. I have one more comment I wanted to make, and I did want to say we have a nice group this morning. I see faces that I haven't seen on this before, which is kind of cool. Alan's staying up late in Australia. I see Doc, you made it in Japan, which is really cool. And people that are not staying up late because they're in New England is Ralph. It's good to see you on this. And I'm sure I missed a few others. I would like to thank all of you for coming and participating and listening and hanging in there. It's been an interesting, different discussion, and I'm hoping you guys enjoyed it as much as I did. I want to thank Dan for doing the usual technical stuff and eventually getting this up on YouTube. Mark for getting it on the Orange County site so that there's a convenient collection of everything. Mel for pushing the dancers around on the dance table. Let's have a big hand for Clark for doing this stuff again. Clark, I like the way you got your more current list compared to the old one, which was an awful lot of overlap. And
Yeah.
And Ted's list in there too. Now all you got to do is talk Ted into joining us on some of these sessions.
Ted will listen to this. He would have joined us, except he's driving to New York to call 2 dances for Times Squares.
Oh, okay. Hello, Ted, eventually. And as usual, if you've only designated an hour for this, you can slip away without feeling guilty or having to apologize. And if you want to talk around for more discussion, you're more than welcome to. I see 2 hands up, and I'll make that 3. There was something I wanted to bring up. But let's continue on with Larry. You had your hand up. I thought you had pulled your hand down, and it's back up again. So,
Yeah, that's true. Because I was thinking about this idea of the top 10 calls, and I thought within the context of challenge dancing, step and fold would be a possibility because it's the foundation of many calls. And since I just know up to C2, there's probably even more calls at C3 and C4 that use the step and fold. And my top 3 would be circulate, run, and trade. I don't know if we, trade. Can't remember if we talked about that, but those would be not only most important to square dancing, but most important to dancer success, possibly.
Right. Yeah. If your dancers have mastered trades, runs, and circulates, they can do a lot.
Right.
Ted had trade on his list, and he
Okay.
teaches it in lesson 1. Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Clark, I was actually thinking before when you were doing a remake,
Yep.
remake the wave. Is that somewhat the same as rewind the remake?
So,
Or is it a convenient thing for people to see?
so here's the thing to say about, that some calls have parts. We think of right and left through as a right pull by and a courtesy turn.
Yeah.
And we think of remake as having 3 parts: the quarter, the first quarter, the second half, and the third quarter. If a call has parts, it ends up that the rewind of the whole call is the parts in reverse order and the rewind of each of those parts. So you rewind the last part, followed by rewind to the middle part, followed by rewind to the first part. So in that sense, that is something, is part of an answer to your question.
And swing the fractions, was that a total rewind?
Well, since swing the fractions is a palindrome, doing swing the fractions in reverse order is still a palindrome, and it didn't matter. And rewinding it doesn't matter whether you rewind it. Rewind of a palindrome is it's still something, but it's not as much as you get from a normal rewind because of the palindrome nature of it. You're right. You're twigging on something there. That's correct.
Chris, you got a hand up. Chris, you're muted. Chris, you look like a flamingo.
Okay. Well, I can't do anything about that, but I missed the very beginning, so I don't know if you mentioned it, but on a list I was thinking of last night, I had Ladies Chain because that was one of the maybe the first call you learned that has parts.
Right. I kind of have Ladies Chain a little bit in there when I had courtesy turn, or Ted had, I think, courtesy turn on there because it introduces the chains and stuff. Also, it's a really difficult call. When I teach the 7th graders, like what you do with your hands, and this person goes here and this guy here and the guy backs up. I mean, there's a lot to courtesy turn. Yeah.
I taught Ladies Chain at a beginners thing a few weeks ago, and I was reminded how hard it is. The other kind of thing that might be important if you're making a list of quote unquote important calls are the calls that are important just because they're part of the culture, even to the point where people who don't know what square dancing is, if you said the names of those calls like do-si-do and Alaman left, they would say, oh, that's square dancing. So that's another kind of a important attribute. But in terms of interesting calls, and you were talking about a bunch of different interesting challenge ones. The twosome and stable together for the reasons that you can explain, I think are kind of interesting.
So stable is simply do the call, walk the path of the call, but do not turn your body at all. Keep your facing direction is locked. So if we think of split circulate, great. If we did a stable split circulate, that would be the same as what other call?
Walk and dodge.
It's a walk and dodge, right? And if we did a stable right and left through, it would be a right pull by and then a half sachet, and you'd end up back to back. Some stable calls are really hard to do. If we had the heads stable square through 2, the first hand is easy, and then the second one is a sideways sliding, and you might debate who goes in front of who. If we did a stable square through 4, that would be too much dancing backwards and shoulder passing and stuff, and that would not be an enjoyable dance action. But double pass through in a stable cloverleaf has a very interesting dance action to it, and it's not actually that hard to do stable, and it ends in lines back to back. So anyhow, that's stable as an interesting concept or idea.
If you did a stable turn through it, it would be a do-si-do.
Yes, I like that. Yeah, stable turn throughs do-si-do. Yeah.
That's why challenge is so bloody nasty.
Yeah.
Why would you call that?
You know,
do-si-do. Yeah.
I was just
The
thinking
other
that
call that, or another call that has you turning in a direction, and in this case, you're going to be changing your facing direction while you're doing it, but it's not necessarily the facing direction that you were thinking you were going to do is twosome. Clark, did you invent twosome?
I invented twosome.
Yeah, tell about
I'm happy to talk about twosome, but let me postpone it just a little bit in case, so we get more questions in first.
I just lumped it in with stable because of the idea of turning in a or in the case of stable, not turning, you know, being faced in a direction other than the one that you would normally go.
Yeah. And actually, I have something else we can do with stable also, but let's put it to the end in case there's other questions and comments.
I was just thinking, I hadn't been thinking about what important calls are, but it struck me that anything in roll or sweep a quarter, even not at plus, but at mainstream, is the first place that we have concepts introduced. Sweep a quarter depends on the direction, depends on the previous call, and roll doesn't. I guess a sweep a quarter is, you know.
No, roll depends on the previous call.
You're right.
Yeah, but I think of all those as suffixes. I think of concepts as like as couples, in tandem, and something like that. But the suffixes are important. And then we also think of circulate as kind of a conceptual call where there's one overriding rule that applies from a lot of places. So I agree, both of those things at mainstream and plus really expand what the dancers have to think about and do.
So I want to tell a slightly longer story about I guess the importance of circulate. Most dancers don't fully understand, you know, they've learned individual calls, but they don't know the concept of circulate that well. Many years ago, one of the Massachusetts clubs asked me to, it was a strong plus club, and they asked me to do an A1 workshop for them. And I said, you guys don't want to go to A1? And they said, yeah, we do. And yes, we're going to, and we'd like you to do it. And I said, well, if you're going to do it anyway, I'll do it. And I think all the plus clubs in the area were hungry for it because we had 18 squares show up. And it was a fun time. But again, as typical of people going into A1, you really wish they knew mainstream and plus better. But you dare not teach it to them because they're there to learn A1. And my typical thing is one of the first things I do in an A1 group is I teach them as couples concept. That way I can teach them mainstream calls again, but they think they're learning something new because we're doing it as couples. But anyway, in this particular thing, third, fourth, fifth weekend, I decided that I had them. They've already learned enough A1 so they know they're going to learn A1. And I thought I'd teach them about circulate. And what I did was point out that there's a path you move around. And I showed them the different paths, the split paths, the diamond paths, and all the other things. And then we went on and did A1, etc. Maybe 10, 11 years later, some guy comes up to me at a dance and he says, you know, I was in that A1 workshop. I said, oh, cool. I didn't remember him, one of 18 squares. He said, and boy, that night you taught us circulate, I was really mad at you. That's a mainstream call. And why were you wasting our time with it? Well, over the last 10 years, I found that was one of the most useful things to learn. The concept of circulating and finding the path and what have you. It was kind of rewarding. It took 10 years for him to give me the right feedback, but it was interesting to hear that.
Dad joke, it takes 10 years before it finally twigs that was a gotcha.
Mel, I missed that. Say it again.
I said, call those my dad joke gotchas. or my grandfather used to do, I call them time bombs, but used to say something and it doesn't really gel until 10 years later. You find yourself using it and you suddenly realize, damn, you got me again.
I love sleepers. Yeah.
Along the same lines, Don, I was teaching the advanced group for tech squares one time, and I had prepared I wrote a whole booklet of definitions with diagrams and everything for them, and I was very surprised because they were such a strong plus club with a reputation for having a lot of high level dancers or whatever, but they the people who were bona fide plus dancers, when they opened that up, the first thing they saw were topological diagrams like people are used to now from Taminations, and they had never seen that before. And they were looking at Circulate paths, including ping pong Circulate, of course. But just looking down at the thing and seeing diagrams of that sort with little arrows and things showing you Circulate paths really freaked several people out. And it was sort of like, it was one of those where have you been all my life kind of moments for them. Now, of course, everybody has Taminations, and so you see that stuff right away. But the first time that they start seeing sort of things from above, and Circulate paths are the big example of that. It's a huge eye opener for people.
Whenever possible, and it's not always that possible. When I was teaching a class, if I had a whiteboard or a blackboard, I would always draw the Circulate paths on the board and let people see it. There were several calls where drawing diagrams really helped. Ryan, it's nice to see you aboard. You're going to have to go back and listen to the tape of the beginning. That Clark did a nice job.
Well, I was busy eating breakfast.
That's right. It's morning for you there. Any other comments, thoughts?
Larry mentioned earlier about the sideways action to add that as the fifth to your 4 types of dance. You were going to talk about that.
Right. Briefly? So we have a gimmick, a square game, a global change to square dancing that's fun to do, like dancing Archie or dancing mirror image. And this one's so-called nose dancing. And the way I like to set it up is from a squared set, have everyone turn and face your partner and put your inside hand on your hip. So for the guys, it would be their left hand on their hip, which would have their elbow poking out like I have in my picture. And that's my nose. So coming out of my front side would be my right hand, and coming out of my back would be my left hand. And then we're going to dance that way. So the nice thing is when I'm in a normal couple, like I am with my partner, it's a guy facing a girl. And if we had the heads bow to your partners, we would turn to have our little elbows, our noses, and we kind of do I'm a little teapot bend and turn back. And then if the first call was heads right and left through, the heads would sashay, sideways across the square, making sure they don't poke anybody with their elbows. And since we want to pass right shoulders, we'd pass belly to belly. And then once we get to the other side, using eye contact as the connection with your partner, you as a unit would do the courtesy turn with the guy. Well, he's not backing up, but he's walking sideways to his right as the girl's walking sideways to their left, etc. It's much easier to show this with a group of 4 after midnight at some place than it is just talking about it. But that's nose dancing, and it's fun to do. The neat thing is an experienced square can do it in real time, mostly in the back of the hall while a caller is doing patter calling. It's not a lot of fun to do with singing calls, but it is something you can do when you're, bored or want something different. And you can dance sideways at full speed. So that was my comment on dancing sideways.
One of the things about, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say one of the ones that is more on the other end of the doable spectrum, up closer to impossible, is chair dancing.
Yes, or bar stool dancing. I think I have it called on my. I have a whole thing called Square Games.
Yeah.
So bar stool dancing. Think of this, and it's actually very closely related to the stable that we just talked about. Let's pretend we only have 4 people. And this is how I show it to people when I want to run a workshop on it. And we pick one of the dancers, let's say the man with his back to the caller, as being the bar stool, or if we actually are in a hotel and we can grab a bar stool or a chair, sit him on the chair or the bar stool. And the other dancers are going to dance such that the bar stool person can only swivel, because it's a swiveling bar stool. That's why we don't want to use a chair initially, but cannot move off his spot on the floor. And you have to work up very slowly with the calls you can do. The first call I might do is step to a wave. And then the next call I'm going to do is very slowly, we're going to do the first part of swing through, and then we're going to do the second part of swing through. And what you discover is a lot of square breathing violently has to happen around the person who's on the bar stool, who can swivel but not move off the spot. And after we slowly work up with swing through and spin the top and fan the top, there's all sorts of interesting calls, and then square throughs and so forth. Chase rights is a funny one, etc. So that's bar stool dancing. Stable bar stool dancing.
In case you didn't get it, the entire square is moving around the one guy.
Yeah. He's like the center of attention.
7 other people have to move to adjust to put the formation where he is and moving around it.
And it's turned simple calls into very hard calls, like join hand, circle left. If you had one person on the bar stool with 8 dancers, like the way that circle mathematically has to move around him is really big and difficult. That's why I started with 4 dancers. And then chair dancing would be a stable bar stool, a bar stool that can't turn. And that's nearly impossible to dance, even without music, even very slowly, even with smart people thinking about it very hard. But it is a variation that we can do.
I've always been amazed at square dancing itself, that it's, or pleased that it has something for everybody. Their party nights, their challenge nights, and everything in between. And the same goes for callers. As I watch the faces in this session, I see some callers say, "Who cares? This is beyond. I'll never get to that. I'm just teaching basic." And then I see faces like Larry's, who's, "Ooh, I gotta try that. Ooh, I gotta try that." But if any of you really dig what Clark has been talking about, next time you're at an event where Clark is, such as Caller Lab, look for a crowd of people in the hall or at a special in a group after in the evening sessions. There's a crowd around Clark, and he's brought a new concept that's crazy for people to dance. And he's always got a square or 2 of people that are very enthusiastically having their minds blown. Clark, you've got a real talent for that, and it's great. Again, it's one end of the square dance calling and dancing spectrum that's cool about the whole thing.
Hey, Clark, did you mention the hashtag dancing?
We did do it. I think we did a session on it, correct?
Yeah, we did.
Yeah, we did a session on it, and I even got Brad to fix up contamination so it could actually show the hashtags.
Clark, you'll have to get him to add square around.
Yes.
Well, I recall, Clark, when we were at, I think it was Wichita, we did the after party in the mainstream hall, and there was a square sort of right in the middle of the hall. It was like you, me, two Swedish couples, and then Stephanie Hennerlau and her partner,
Uh-huh.
and we were dancing Mirror in the mainstream hall, and then
Right
we
in the middle.
switched. Yeah, right in the middle. So while everyone was circling left, we were circling right. And we were messing with some of the callers who were on stage trying to figure out what the hell we were doing. And then as to make it even a little more challenging, we did, I think, what you referred to as rotates. So after each figure, we rotated 1/8 of the square.
Oh.
So as you're dancing a boy at this point, and then you rotate 1/8, so you end up being a girl the next figure. But we're also dancing mirror, so we're doing things reverse to everybody else. So it was quite a fun after party, I thought.
Yeah, I can
I
believe
lo-
I did that.
I like to add that if you're calling and Clark is on the floor, don't watch his square.
Yeah.
They're probably correct, but only in their own minds. Anyone else? Dan, you've been quiet. You must be halfway in between blown away and who cares?
Well, yeah, I mean, some of this is, I think, the interesting things to me, because my focus is on the simpler dancing, are things like Mel's comment about introducing diamonds earlier than spin chain through, and some of the things about calling these things in parts.
A lot of that, Dan, was, it's not introducing diamonds, but just that flow and that feeling of the formation. It's like what Clark was saying. The first thing that jumped in my mind when he was talking counter rotate is at the basic, and then it created such a stir in the SSD program, but that concept was being introduced with super sweep or Ferris wheel. Everybody sweep a quarter. You've got that same kind of concept. So those concepts are being introduced. It's like if you read the basic add-ons or what's in the basic program definitions, a lot of the concepts that come in advance are usable at basic, and they're part of the basic program, but there's limitations on how far you push that. And it's just a difference from the top down to the bottom up approach to square dancing, which is, this really opened up my eyes a lot. And great presentation, Clark.
Thank you. A lot of, while I was chatting with Ted, one of his comments is, he's like, I can call almost all the plus calls except maybe the spin chain and exchange the gear, snake around thing directionally to mainstream dancers. Which kind of makes you wonder, well, why do we need calls? What's the point of inventing a call? Do we need a right and left through if we can just call right pull by and courtesy turn? And Don answered that a little bit with his comment about, is also a worthwhile call, or can we just call hinge and split counter rotate? And sometimes the combination of the two together, like it just blends or melds it, or you think about it or dance it differently. So and then, like, if we now know that square dancing is all these calls and concepts, what if we were to start again from scratch? Should we just pick the very primitive ones like a mathematician would and build up from there? Or is there something artistic in it that we really need, Alaman left to an Alaman thar, and that's just part of our heritage and it fits in a certain way? Those are interesting things to ponder.
The story that I didn't witness a conversation, but the story went around that Ron Schneider and Lee Kopman were talking, and Ron said to Lee, after Lee had created the call pass and roll, Ron said, "Who needs pass and roll? I can call step, two wave, scoot back, and split circulate." And Lee's answer was, "I do."
Larry?
Yeah, so this has to do with some of the games we were talking about earlier. And when I was at Albuquerque Collar Lab Convention, what was that, 4 years ago? 3 years ago? Whatever that was. You were there, right?
Yes.
Okay. So one night there was well, there were dances every night, but one night I was in the back of the hall, and there was a square in the back that was doing mirror dancing. You might have even been in that square. I don't know.
Likely.
But I had never seen that before, and I thought that was fantastic. And then someone left the square, and they literally turned around and looked at me and said, "Join us." And I said, "Okay." So I jumped in there, and I will tell you, it's the most fun I've ever had in my entire life, dancing that mirror square. And I was curious. I'm going to this year's Color Lab, and I was wondering if you knew that if there was going to be any dancing and anybody in a mirror square.
I don't know. Unfortunately, I decided not to attend,
Okay.
but I'm sure there's going to be dancing, and if you have the right people there, you can probably talk them into doing stuff like a mirror square. For those, if you aren't aware, a mirror square, all we're going to do is interchange what's left and right, which means it's also interchanging clockwise and counterclockwise. But all the boys are still boys, the girls are girls. So to square up, you would have to be sashayed, because normally the boy's on the left, so the boy has to be on the right, etc. And promenades go the other way, the handholds go the other way. And what it really takes you out of as a dancer is all the instinctive things are the places where you fluff up. You can generally get a mirror square through 3 or square through 4 pretty accurately, because it's just a left square through. But the instinctive things like passing right shoulders on a double pass through, those are where you tend to kind of walk into people, and courtesy turns you fumble on, and promenades. And if you do the singing call mirror, swings become as awkward as the first time you've ever swung somebody. So it's good experience. And I think all these things, the first time you do hexagon or hashtag or mirror or archy, they all give you that sense of, whoa, this is really neat and interesting. I've never had this much fun before, because I'm using all the knowledge I've learned, but in a way that I've never used it.
It makes me think here, Clark, that we learn square dancing we learn we got to do this, that, and that. We pretty quickly convert that to doing it by rote. And then you're making us go back and think about, we have to do this, this, and this, and undo the rote stuff.
Yeah.
Anna has her hand up.
Anna?
Yeah, I tried that mirror dancing, and I agree, it is the most fun thing I've done in a long time. And the most difficult thing to do in that square was to do the swing.
Yes. It really takes you back to even worse than as a beginner.
Yeah.
Boss?
It's swing and promenade it's the hardest thing, I think, when you start. I called a fun dance on the New Year's party with 3 squares doing mirror, but it's, as a caller, it's hard to resolve the square if all the squares dance mirror. So I have to turn around and look in the window to resolve the square. And it still works.
A mirror is your friend. I'll resolve.
That's where it's good to be calling in an actual dance studio or ballet studio where they have mirrors around the walls.
That's a good way to cheat on that is your laptop, which you could be sitting on the thing there with the laptop with a camera pointed at the dancers, right? And you can easily invert the if it's not already, invert the image that you're looking at on the screen of the dancers in front of you.
Good idea.
An electronic mirror, basically.
Or if you're going to challenge the dancers, you might as well challenge yourself also.
Yeah, no, that's why I said cheat.
Image or.
Yeah, the best thing is just use mental image or modules.
Yeah, Clark.
Yes.
Like I said, fantastic presentation. I'd love for you to do one, Dawn, if you can get them back. I'm sitting here at these top 10 calls, but there's a real disconnect between the approach from a caller's point of view and the dancer's point of view. I put a note there in the chat.
Yeah, I was just reading that. Yeah.
And I would love to see a full session of that, just to get your impressions on how dancers look at it and how callers look at it, mainly from your perspective, because you came top down, dancing bottom up, but calling top down, and now you're sort of flipping that on its end. So you've got a unique perspective looking at it both ways. I would love to see a session on that.
Yeah, well, presumably we'd want to talk to a bunch of dancers or experienced dancers to see what how they would answer it, right?
Yeah, and new experience and new dancers and new callers as well, because a new caller would probably say, you know, my focus is solely on the dancers, and this is the important thing, is getting to that corner resolution. That's where it's important for me. What do I need to get there? And how that perspective changes over time. So I think that'd be a great presentation.
We should put Yolanda on the spot. What were you thinking of when you saw the title for 10 important calls or whatever?
Oh, I think that has changed over time. At first, if it was just like dancers, and then it was just a beginner calls, and then at the moment it's like, which ones can I do on terminations, and which ones can I do with the checkers, and stuff. And then it's like, how can I get creative now, right? As I know, and I'm probably making mega mistakes like this I did this at the beginning of the day here, but it's the fun of creating something and then knowing, because my own choreography is on blue cards, so I know that I have to double check them, right? But I mean, I literally I woke up in the middle of the night this week, and it was like, oh, now I figured out how to fix the singing call, and I literally got out of bed because I was afraid of forgetting it, and wrote it all down, actually tried it one time, and then went back to bed for a couple hours. So I'm getting hooked. But so some of the callers actually, like if I'd seen this session last year, I would have been completely over my head. But some of the callers thought it was really fun if I would go, because I was learning plus. They said, oh, you just got to get over your A thing. So I'll let you call plus as long as you go into my A class. And they said, and they only said A, right? They didn't say it was an A1-2 split. So I was doing, and it sort of got me over the A level. And then, so then there was another caller, and he says, oh, you're doing that class. Well, some of those calls are in my session. Why don't you come in and do that? Well, he forgot to mention that it was C1 as well. So you're talking about, counter
rotate,
counter rotate, and so and stuff. And it's like, oh, okay. So now it's much more interesting. So, but last year I wouldn't have had a clue what you're talking about, right? I mean, I won't be using it as a caller right away, but I now look at it. This is my library, so that's why I'm recording, because things that didn't make sense even half a year ago or a week ago all of a sudden make sense, and go, oh, so that's what they're talking about. So I am learning dancing top down now in a way. And all of a sudden, an A1 move makes sense, because at C1 level, they're using that to pair off. And so they're using it a lot. And so it's like, oh, okay. So then the next session I'm in my A1-2 class, and it's like, oh, you got that one down. I said, yeah. Right?
It's a lot like going to an auto repair shop and opening up an expert mechanics toolbox, and you're just looking at all this crazy stuff, and you have no idea what it's for and how it's used and when you might need it, and that if you grab one of these and one of these together, it can do even more. Yeah,
well, it's a good analogy, because he still can't find his number 10 socket, 10 millimeter socket.
Yeah, well, someone stole it, right? You aren't allowed to use Ferris wheel in your singing call anymore. Now what? Yeah. How about you?
Alan?
I was just going to ask Doc, what are your 10 important calls?
Doc, you're muted.
He's thinking.
He's trying to figure out how to unmute. It's the middle of the night there.
I know. I woke him up.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
We hear you. Do you have 10 important calls?
Well, I didn't realize that the topic is so that wide range thing.
Yes.
But, once removed concept
Yep.
gave me a big headache.
Yep.
And I used to be working for engineering the machinery, and the once removed movement is quite interesting.
Yes.
It's swivel. And if you do it in the same radius, do this, that makes a good fluid machine.
Yes.
That's another thing. Sorry about that, but you know, I just just reminded me of my fact that I did in a company. That's all.
Okay.
Nothing. Really.
And I think I interrupted you, Alan.
I was just I thought initially it was if you had to restart square dancing from scratch,
Mm-hmm.
and you had to redesign a call list. That's what I thought would have been really interesting, because then you decide what calls are really necessary to create an excellent platform of square dancing, and that would then open a big discussion about, are some of the folk aspects of the activities still essential, or are they really essential in terms of, do we keep them or don't we? Yeah.
Yeah.
And the reason why I mentioned RSO was that I thought really RSO should be down in the basics program. That sort of thoughts, you know, if you tried to pick 10 calls which you would recreate square dancing with, and I agree with the ideas of circulate runs, etc.
Yeah. Yeah.
Clark, a couple of questions. Why, when you were talking about the biggies that involve all 8 people, you didn't put grand square in there?
I had grand square or teacup chain. I wasn't quite sure which.
I didn't.
Something
Okay.
from a squared set. Yeah.
Anyway, when you're talking about counter rotate, I was surprised you didn't do split counter rotate. I've always thought it was kind of interesting that typically when you take a call and then do something different with it and then fractionalize it and then split it, you go from big to little. But in the square dance world, split counter rotate is the easiest. Counter rotate is the next most difficult. And then rotate is even more difficult than that. It's a reverse order of difficulty, which I always found fascinating.
Right. Well, because rotate has the word rotate in it, just like counter rotate does, and they're somewhat related, but they aren't really offsprings of each other. Yeah. Yeah. No, you're right. Split counter. I mentioned split circulate is a variation on circulate. I should have mentioned split counter rotate.
It's kind of almost easier to see, but.
Let me do the twosome real quick, because Doc kind of hit close to it and it wasn't the question, and Chris had mentioned it. Can Mel bring up terminations, and let's see if it knows twosome. We're looking for two-face lines. And see if you can do couples twosome circulate.
Remove the word couples.
It's probably not in there because I think it's on the C3B list.
Yeah, I don't think it's up to C1.
So, but I can fake it for a little bit for you guys. So, do a centers trade for a sec. So, if you look at man 4 and lady 4, they are a couple. We're going to have them dance in a slightly different way. Watch the pattern they dance as we do a once removed circulate. I'm sure it can do this. So what I can say is that lady 4 is always to the, if we think of north as being above us and south is south, is always to the west, over to the left. So lady 4 is always to the west of man 4, and how we dance these once removed calls. So I'm going to do another once removed circulate. That's easy for them because it's no big deal. They're just going straight ahead. But now we're going to do one more once removed circulate, and watch how they relate to each other. They're always a pair. They always have a consistent facing direction. It's north turning east, turning south. You see that motion? And that is twosome, and that would be called couples twosome. You can see we have to enter it as once removed. Yeah. Oh, you're just going to focus on one? And let's do do a couples hinge first. Oops.
Sorry, I was just going to play that so
That's
you can
okay.
just see the action.
Oh, good. Yeah, there we go. You can see how they're. I always thought of them as like pair skaters as they're ice dancing around the rink, and they, right. Okay, so I'll let Mel create this. I want two-faced lines across left to right. Do it as couples peel and trail. That'll get you there. Okay, so now we're going to do a once removed left swing through and watch our people, and notice how we now have the man to the left, to the west of the lady.
I think I'd like
try once removed swing through.
Doesn't like it from that formation.
Do as couples trade the wave. Maybe it only likes right hand ones. Okay, now it's the lady to the left. See if you can do it once removed swing through from here. Crap. What if we do a once removed arm turn half or trade? Whatever you think is going to be the most likely. No, too bad. Okay,
Clark,
I can't show it well here.
if you wanted to do a once removed swing through, you could do a turn and deal, centers left turn and deal.
Close. So do it this way. Type turn and deal because you'll play it in real time. Yep. Veer left. Centers left turn and deal. Undo.
Very
center
centered.
4. Maybe center 4 left turn and deal. Nope. It's not, they aren't the very centers. How about center 4 left turn and deal?
Go.
Veer center 4 veer right.
I'll bet you there's not
And
enough
then-
square breathing there.
It looks like we lost some square breathing. Keep trying.
Say sides veer right.
I still have the same problem. Because the other ones are static, so they're trying to occupy the same space, which is interesting because they're stepping to left-hand waves instead of right-hand waves.
Center slither.
Still have the same problem with the outside dancers.
I was just correcting what the system was doing wrong.
Yeah.
Or you could say head slide apart and then do it.
So Clark, it's really based on doing like a turn and deal as you circulate?
It's like turn and deal actions when you're as a couple doing 180-degree turns. And it's like from tandems, it's like follow throughs and half tags or however you want to think of it. Yeah.
Mark,
But-
what's the is there a call where in two-phase lines the trailers circulate and the leaders crossover circulate or turn and deal?
That's once removed circulate or couples twosome circulate.
That's it though. There's no.
Yeah, you're thinking crossover circulate has the trailers sashay as they go, and the leaders do like the once removed circulate.
Yeah. All right. I thought there was a unique call for that down at the advanced level, but
Yeah.
I can't think of it.
So now Mel's going to make it play as one smooth motion, right?
Absolutely.
After all that work.
All right.
But the couples versions with 180-degree turns and twosome dance very well, are flowing, and yeah. Well, thank you for trying. Yep.
It'll get you there, but the journey's not pretty.
Yeah. So twosome's very danceable. I like it. It makes dancing once removes easier. But when it first came out, it was very hard for traditional challenge callers, the established challenge callers, to understand and teach. So there was a lot of reluctance to adopt it, but it slowly got adopted. And then once all the dancers knew how to do it and no one had to teach it, it was all taught in tape groups and workshops. Then the established challenge callers at the time just started using it.
One of the things that I learned from Brad at Mel's last session on terminations, you can do, two couples do this while the others, or,
Yes,
while the sides do that. And you might have been able to fake it even better, but
I thought about that, but because of the complexity, you've got the centers doing something while the sides do this, then this, then this,
Yeah.
then this, then this. And it'll only allow you to go once while it won't allow you to string about 5 or 6 of them together.
So Clark, we should watch terminations do some strange things and then name it
yeah. Oh, that could be a call, right? Yeah.
as a new concept or something. One of the bugs I noticed after playing with terminations after Mel's last thing was that if you have couples back to back and call spin the top, it does it incorrectly. It's supposed to do nothing, and I wrote Brad about it, and he says, "Oh, I guess I better change that. I had the algorithm. It's doing what I told it to do." I said, trade and then fan the top.
Oh, that's funny.
So he from couples back to back, if you try it, you'll get partner trade, step 2, wave, and fan the top.
Maybe we could have a whole family of calls that are defined by and named after bugs and terminations. So you can call things like, ticket 53.
Yeah.
Or just, do a terminations spin the top, do a terminations
Right.
cross roll to a wave,
January tam spin the top.
Go down.
You can do a spin the top from here.
That's good. And some people could ask, why can't spin the top be a trade followed by fan the top? Why doesn't that fit the definition? Why isn't that a legitimate use?
I'm just saying, why isn't that, or is that going to be coming out next year as trade?
Yeah.
And when I sent it to Brad, I said, I haven't looked at the current definitions, so maybe this is right, but did you really want it to do this? And he said, they're doing just what I told them to. I'm going to have to tell them to do something different.
I think if you ever called that, you'd have the centers doing a spin the top and the outside standing there going, what does he want?
Yeah, but from lines facing out.
Oh, yeah. That's a good.
Yeah, just another example of why square dance callers shouldn't be using computer programs to teach them
Yeah.
what the calls do and what variations are legal.
Just another example of how cool a language this square dance thing is. It's sort of like the English language. There are rules, but they don't all, some of them contradict each other.
So make two-face lines, like switch the wave or something, whatever. Or I'm sorry, recycle veer. Okay, do spin the top from there.
That was horrible flow, by the way, there, Mel.
Yeah, I know that. I don't know why I typed right. I meant to type left.
Yeah, he who completes or complains about flow all the time.
Right, and I don't believe spin the top from a two-face line is legit. You could call two-face spin the top, or you could call start with a partner trade spin the top. But that's the other thing that he's accidentally let in, right?
Well, the other one to look would see if like spin chain through and stuff is also being done that way. Because some callers, of course, try to do that.
Yeah, I'm online. You can see me, can you?
Yeah.
It's actually been a popular thing in the Teen Festival Mysteries to do spin chain through multiple ways, being it as a series of arm turns or trades and casts. So rather than following the actual definition, they just say it's a half, three quarter, and then sometimes the halves are trades. So yeah, it's just something that's been done with the Teen Festival, and we kind of accepted it.
Do you have to say special words or any prefix, or do you just everyone?
No,
knows
I think what happened was it started with Dave Stevens years ago. I think in '82 he did a centers begin spin chain through. So he said he wanted centers half and then three quarters and then half three quarters, which is, you know, reasonable, but still doesn't follow the actual definition. And then they started, you know, from two-faced lines. They said using trades and casts where needed to us. You know,
yeah. Well, as long as you say the special words, right?
Correct.
Yeah, as long as you have the incantation.
Yep. So yeah, so you'll do a using trades and casts where needed from two-faced lines. You say centers begin spin chain through, so the centers turn half, and then everyone does a cast off three quarters, then the centers trade, and then everybody casts three quarters. So.
What kind of thing, Clark? Brian, I got the wrong Clark. Did the kids in the competitions have the most problems with?
Circulates.
Really?
Yep. When the kids are training, the biggest thing that we have to run through their little brains is circulates and formation awareness. So the one thing that we teach them is not only the circulates, but when you finish each individual call, and sometimes each individual part of a call, it's expected that they touch to recognize the formation. So for instance, if you ever watch the kids dance a load the boat, they'll actually touch after each part.
I've always thought that one of the things that makes the difference between easy and hard choreography for dancers is for better dancers to be able to handle more difficult choreography is formation awareness.
Correct. Yeah, and then also being able to identify the dancers and knowing what your formation is in order to apply the definition correctly.
I always think it's so very important that formation awareness be part of the foundations of learning how to dance at the basic level. It should be incorporated right in, you know, right into the teaching structure.
That's one of the interesting things about scoot back. When you call head square through, touch a quarter, scoot back, people seem to get into that knowing. But if you call head square through, step to wave or touch, and then scoot back, all of a sudden they're working with people in the other wave, and formation awareness really helps with that.
Right.
I mean, one of the problems is they're trading in those going into the center are opposite sex instead of same sex, and that's scary. Brian, I'd still love to have you do a session on the competitions and how they work and why they're okay in square dancing and all that other stuff.
But they're not okay in square dancing. That's part of the problem.
Well, they're in general.
General square dancing tends to look at competition as a bad thing.
Yes, it does, and yet it's been so successful and hasn't killed square dancing in the Northeast, in the Northwest, and that's why I thought it would be an interesting presentation. But I won't put you on the spot because I know you've said no.
I think it'd be a great presentation, Don, because most of the big festivals have square dance competitions. Most of the nationals have square dance competitions. I know in the heyday here in Australia, they had square dance competitions where your square, the prizes were upwards of $10,000 to the winning square. I mean, these were square dance competitions.
Right, but of course, being that I've come from square dance competition throughout my entire life, whenever I go see that at the national, I go, oh well, I wonder exactly which square that caller is sight calling on, because I think they're going to win, and usually it's the square that has the tech squares in it.
I think I think dancers like competition when it's a novelty that you specially announce it. And like one gimmick that people will do sometimes, callers will do sometimes, is get all the boys in one square and get all the girls in another square, and do a battle of the sexes. And so I mean that kind of gimmicky thing is not something obviously you want to do very often, but usually people seem to react well to a novelty tip like that every now and then. So it's not exactly competition per se, it's how it's incorporated culturally into what you're doing. So I think we could actually probably have a lot more of it if it were handled carefully. You just don't want everybody walking into the dance thinking they're competing with each other normally.
Right.
That's the thing
I was at the national when they did the first competition, and I was looking out at the floor, and I said, "Oh well, there's an entire square filled with callers, and they've got John Marshall in the square." And I said, "Okay, well they're going to do very well." But then right next to them was a square of gay challenge dancers that also had Debbie Cedar in the square, and I said, "Okay, well they're going to win," and they did. So I could tell based on who was in the square, who was going to do well. There were some who did reasonably well, but yeah. And again, the other problem was that Tony was pretty much sight calling on the squares that he felt were going to do well.
When I see a square of callers, my first reaction is not, oh, they'll do well.
Well, it depends on the callers.
What I think is, oh, look, there's a square full of people who all think they know what I'm going to call next, and they're wrong.
Well, there's female callers and cuers, and we'll actually organize ahead of time when we go to a jamboree so that we'll all meet in a certain hall. And the guys, and the way we get around it with the guys is that we will get them to compete, because after one square then it's like, oh, but there's not enough girls to go around, right? So but we all do both positions, so then we switch throughout and we don't tell each other, so we all have to switch at least once throughout the call, and but we have to be back home when we're through. The caller just knows, ignore that square, right? Because there's no way you can sight call to us, but we have the greatest amount of fun.
Just correcting a comment about Mel made about Australia. In Australia, they had a competition, Square Dancing Association, and it was about the flair and the artistic aspects of square dancing, not whether they could do every call from every situation. So it was how well they could dance, and they led to doing all sorts of weird things like aeroplane lifts and all the rest. But so it was like almost like an Olympics, the artistic part of it, and you had to have judges, and so it was totally different.
Right. Well, the Teen Festival also has that component as well. We refer to it as the display category, And
Right.
so they're dancing singing calls across the floor. They do 3 singing calls, and they're supposed to make them look as pretty as they can. And there's actually one example, and I'll have to find a link to it. And it was amazing. These kids were wearing hats, and while they were dancing, they were swapping the hats between their partners. And it was just something they were constantly doing as they would do a square through, and as they were doing the square through, the people that were dancing the square through were swapping hats with each other. And it just looked amazing. Had absolutely nothing to do with square dancing, but it looked amazing. And of course they won. But and that's kind of what the display category is all about. Now, at the same time, they're supposed to execute the calls correctly too. And that's the other thing that they do, but it's well practiced choreography.
Yes.
Unfortunately, Brian, everything I've seen on on YouTube of these challenges, I've never seen the styling challenges, just the choreographic challenges. It'd be cool to have some of the other stuff up there too.
Yeah.
And and that would
I'm-
create an interest in square dancing that might get us some dancers that we wouldn't get otherwise. Just
I remember the first time long ago when the Times Squares showed up at a regular festival. So we got to see those guys for the first time, and they had all kinds of. I thought that we had plenty of fun flourishes and stuff from the. It was not a teen group, but the young adult group that I was raised in. But the gay group, those dancers just blew me away. They had all kinds of really cool flourishes and stuff that they were doing, and it was really colorful. And of course, they were all dressed up in their sequined Times Squares outfits and everything, so it looked cool. But I don't actually see people doing that. I don't see people doing that very much anymore.
well, I know as a caller, I've actually been asked to change all the arm movement as much as possible so that because of arthritis, people don't want, the California twirls and those kind of things anymore. They do want everything to be hands below, waistline.
It's an interesting comment, Yolanda, because when I was learning to dance, one of the biggest things that was taught, because we had everybody from age 96 to age 6 in the club, and they were all dancing together. So things like dive throughs and California twirls were often quite awkward. But one of the things that was taught in Europe was you were taught the movement and shown, but you were also taught if you're going to do a California twirl and you've got a 4-foot dancing with a 7-foot person, how to release hands and join hands at the end of them. That was part of the styling for almost everything that you did. And all of those aspects are taken out in favor of, well, let's not use that movement anymore.
And the funny thing is that I see those very same people going on the floor for round dancing and doing an element, and I'm going, but you guys have no problem doing it then. Like it's funny.
I made a comment a while back about somebody comparing round dancing body flow to square dancing body flow, because they do the arm turns, or they do the half sachets, or they do the sudden changes of directionless. You cannot compare the two because square dancing has a different physical movement in both the legs and the frame of the body, as well as the timing for dancing those movements to judge body flow on. It's a completely different concept and different feel for dancing. But again, that was an opinion. It was controversial, and I stick by it.
When I wrote the announcement of this thing, I said, this one should be fun. It was. And I still think that if we could do one on the pros and cons of competition in square dancing, and there are definitely pros and definitely cons, but there's a way to blend them, that I think it would be a fun one also. And I can't think of anybody better to lead it than Brian Clark.
Yes, yes, definitely.
Maybe, Brian, you can suggest somebody else.
Which hand are we twisting?
I'm busy looking for that display square. That's what I'm doing.
Yeah, I looked for the display square. I didn't find it. Wow, I'm spacing on his name. he did calling for the teen festival and his kids and everything.
Oh, you mean Ray Brenzy?
Yeah, why not have Ray Brenzy do it? Ask Ray Brenzy. If Brian won't do it, ask Ray Brenzy.
That's right. Yeah, he's on the Board of Governors, isn't he?
I don't know.
I can't say I've heard his name before.
Oh, no, he
Yeah,
did.
see, that makes me smile.
Present company excluded. He did one of the best to dance teen festival mystery tapes that we've ever danced to.
On the against competition side, many decades ago, there was a club in Chicopee, Mass, and a group of us from the Haymakers at UMass were dancing there. And this guy, they had an I did it tip, and you got a badge if you won, which looked like idiot instead of I did it. And last square standing was the one that got the badge. My square was last square standing. They never did send me my badge, but a year or two after that, I was at Jim Mayo's, or 3 or 4 or 5 years after, I was at Jim Mayo's caller school, and he was saying how competition was terrible. And I said, well, we did it and it was fun. And he said, yeah, your square had fun. What about the other 15 squares on the floor that didn't win? And that made me think too. Just a matter of judgment here and there. As I say, there are pros and cons.
But people choose to go into the competition.
I'm not saying that the competition is no good. I've seen results of things Brian has showed me and others that it's really quite a cool thing.
What people don't want is they don't want to show up to a dance where the dance is always a competition and you have no choice about it. And some people are militant, so fearful of that kind of thing happening that they oppose the very existence of these competition events. So I think that's that's the sort of fear that drives people saying competition is so horrible.
And as I say in my teaching talk, people don't like to be embarrassed. And if there's a fear of them missing something and being embarrassed by it, they aren't going to enjoy it.
The main reason why people take any kind of dance lesson is to not be embarrassed.
And as Mayo said, dancers like to be challenged and win, which in my words means they like variety, not challenge, but just think they're being challenged. Anyway, talk for another another session. Any other? I don't even remember what this session was. Oh, most important calls, top calls. Clark, thank you for bringing up that topic. Somebody else mentioned a topic you can bring up, and I hope you wrote it down. You could lead. I hope you wrote it down because I can't remember it. I'm loving the fact that we're down to 11 people and we still have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 countries represented. I wonder what we could do about explaining or talking about how this is people think of square dancing as American, but boy, it's been going almost as long elsewhere too. Anyway, that's another topic also. Anybody else got things they want to add before I go have lunch? Before Doc goes back to sleep?
Yeah. Top 10 important calls. That's what we're talking about, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then I sent a small dance programs from starting from About Your Partner up to a Bend the Line, and that's the most important calls, really. For us, they are getting the beginners well educated and graduated is the most important thing, especially now. So I'm concentrating to that job. Thank you.
Yeah, Clark, you said at the beginning it was depends on what basis, what criteria you use for deciding what's the most important. And as Doc just brought up, getting people moving and dancing in the first place to experience some form of square dancing, you might consider bow to your partner, bow to your corner, circle left, promenade as being most important, because that makes people dance, and that's what we're trying to do, get them to move to the music, or with some of the modern music, get them to move despite the music. But
that's a week 0 thing. Yeah.
And with that, we're down to 10 people, and I should really
Yep, I should go get lunch.
They don't.
I'll find it later and let you guys know.
Okay,
But,
that'd be
Brian,
great.
I look
Yes, I
very
would like to-
forward to your presentation. Clark, excellent presentation. And
Thank
I still
you.
would
Yeah.
love to see the comparative dancer to caller.
Dancer versus
where we
caller,
look at,
yep.
Yeah, importance.
Yeah.
Good stuff. Thank you.
Take care,
Have a good
guys.
night.
And I mailed you the notes, Dan.
Excellent. I'll toss them up. Cool. Thanks.
And I've saved the chat so I can leave.
See you all later. Bye-bye.
Bye, guys.
Bye.